warm welcome to all the viewers and the teams who are present on this debate contest. My name is David and I will be the debate president for today's round. It is a good thing to debate motions and ideas in a highly cultured manner. Competencies needed for public speaking and participation are sharpened, and it's also an excellent way to address people in our society and to raise awareness for global challenges that we face on the earth. In this debate, we particularly talk about climate change and its effect. This is why Hungarian Baptist Aid organizes this series of debates in Hungary. It is supported by the European Union's Development, Education and Awareness Raising Program, and the climate of change debates run simultaneously in 13 European countries. Today's motion is the following. The rules of receiving environmental and climate refugees must be included in the asylum laws of every member state of the European Union. The debate format is the following. The proposition team argues for the motion and the contra team speaks against the motion. Rounds consisting of 2 3-minute speeches are followed by 2-minute consultation breaks. After the speeches, an 8-minute free debate is conducted where the president gives the floor to the speakers. The debate is concluded by 3-minute closing remarks of the 2 team captains. The judges give points based on content and presentation style. Each team can receive a maximum of 150 points that they will carry on to the next round. I hereby commence the debate, and I would like to ask the captain of the pro team to give his speech.
I would like to welcome everyone on today's debate. I would like to welcome the honorable judges and the contra team. Our motion for today is the following. The rules of receiving environmental and climate refugees must be included in the asylum law of every member state of the EU. We would like to start with the definitions. Asylum law. The law with which asylum and certain rights are provided for those defined as refugees. If environmental and climate refugees, persons or groups of persons who predominantly for reasons of sudden or progressive changes in the environment that adversely affect their lives or living conditions are obliged to leave their habitual homes or choose to do so either temporarily or permanently and who move within their country or abroad. Our first argument would be the following, which is urgent problem which needs solution. Well, human-made global climate crisis is undoubtedly the biggest challenge of the 21st century. Coastal populations' habitat is endangered by sea level rising caused by the melting of the ice caps. People living near to the equator are experiencing extreme weather conditions and heat waves, and they all have to move from their natural habitat or their habitual homes because of these heat waves. And according to the IPCC, 1 meter sea level rising would destroy 40% of the rice fields of Bangladesh, but the forecasts are the same for India and China and the Philippines or Venezuela. So we would say this is urgent, this is happening now, and this will happen now, which leads us to our second argument, which is a need for a legal framework. After the 1945, the modern refugee system was built upon the continuous legal development of international and national law systems. Since then, numerous new asylum statuses have been introduced and accepted by the international community, such as protected persons, introduced by the European Union, and the European Union in particular is one stage of this legal development, since they have the common European migration policy, which is about harmonizing different nations' law systems or national law systems, and have a common legal background for them. And our third argument is about security, which will be stated with the following participants.
We would also like to welcome the distinguished judges and the honorable opposing team. Let's just first state that our team wholeheartedly disagrees with the statement of this debate, and we would like to prove why it's wrong in the following arguments. By the way, the replies will be done by our first speaker, Adam, and I will just offer you our own arguments. Our first argument is that the EU member states don't have the capacity to accommodate this large number of people. The already unstable economies of the European member states have been further deteriorated by this COVID pandemic. Growing unemployment, growing inflation, the radical transformation of working conditions, and the general growth of depression all point to the imminence of a new global recession. The European Commission, the European Parliament, and the EU leaders have agreed to give out the largest stimulus package ever, 1.8 trillion euros to help recovery from the pandemic. This further proves that the EU doesn't have any further money to accommodate this large number of people. Our second argument is that there are better alternative solutions, and we listed some, and I would like to elaborate on one of these. If anything, the EU should help the countries in this crisis locally by helping create a greener economy, as the EU has a greater experience in it. The EU is already involved in modernizing the environmental policies of its own member states. It would also create jobs and therefore a reason for people to stay. This way offers a long-term solution for an existing problem and does not just delay the problem and let it accumulate. Our third argument is that the European Union is far from being a main agent of environmental degradation. Therefore, the consequences should not be borne by it. The EU's carbon dioxide emission is less than proportionate to its population, as opposed to North America and Asia, whose contributions are 3 or 4 times greater than what their population would justify. Let me add some numbers here. China contributes with a 30% rate of emissions to the global emission rate, with only 19% of its population. The United States has has 15% of the global emission rate, with only 4.5% population. Also, while European and Central Asia together are responsible for only 3.6% of the world's plastic pollution, East Asia and the Pacific contributes with 60%. It is morally unacceptable to portion out the consequences of the actions of irresponsible actors to a responsible one. China, the United States, and all the other main contributors to the current environmental crisis should be held accountable for their actions. Thank you for your attention.
I would also like to welcome everyone, including the opposing team and the honorable judges. And today our motion is that the rules of receiving environmental and climate refugees must be included in the asylum law of every member state of the EU. Therefore, we are speaking about the asylum law and the law itself, and not about the capacity. Because the EU already has a capacity. In our third argument, which is security, we are speaking about human and country wide security. It is a security threat for humans. Therefore, the EU is offering children asylum to recover from their traumas caused by climate change. It is also a threat multiplier because it strengthens already existing problems. For example, on the aridity line, which is the borderline of the desert, conflicts were more frequent than usual because that's the place where climate change is the most. When climate change is really harsh. And for your second argument, which is about the better alternatives, and that the EU should provide greener economies and create jobs so that it would be a reason for them to stay. They cannot stay because of the climate change, because they do not have water to drink, because they do not have the environment to live safely. And the EU is already providing a lot of help for these people, already showing that they have the capacity and they are willing to help these people. I would also like to elaborate on our first argument, which is that it is an urgent problem. and that most people, for example, coming from Africa, are going to Europe, the most ambitious ones and the most the bravest ones. And Tiziana Corda, who worked for the Institution of International Politics at the University of Milan, created an indicator for migration. And included that, for example, in Botswana, climate change has 70 rates and unemployment only 18 rate. And therefore, I would like to reflect on our second argument, which is about the law system itself, and that human rights and the right for the habitual environment started to get together during the 1972 Stockholm Conference. Therefore, we are stating that this should be included in the asylum law of every member state of the European Union.
Okay, I would like to welcome the dear judges and the dear opposing team. I would like to continue the debate with rebuttals. Your first argument was that climate change poses a big challenge and an existing threat to humanity. We do not deny this. However, you have pointed out that it threatens largely those nations that contribute the most to these kinds of environmental problems. As we have pointed out, 60% of plastic pollution comes from East Asia and the Pacific. China is responsible for 30% of the world's CO2 emissions. You've pointed out that China and its nearby countries are the ones most affected by this climate change. Therefore, our second argument, which is alternative solutions, provides a great solution that is suitable for everybody. We say that internal migration is always better than external migration, because internal migration negates the fact that external migrants have to accommodate for language, social skills, cultural reasons, and many more cultural shocks of a new country. Instead, internal migration between countries with similar language, cultures, and customs could solve the crisis easier, better, more cost-efficient, and with less trauma and shock to those affected. And it could actually force those responsible for these climate changes to take up actions for their own mistakes. Your second argument was that it needs a legal framework, which we do not deny. What we deny is that it needs to include the climate refugees in the asylum laws of every member of the United States. You have not brought an argument to support this. You said that we should bring legal framework. You haven't said what kind of legal framework. You haven't pointed to an example. You said that we need one, but haven't pointed out why is it such a necessity. Your third argument that humans are that it is a large threat to humanity. We therefore do not deny this. We say that the EU should help these people. We say that we should fund everything that we can. And this was our second argument, that the EU should help these countries become greener, help these countries to invest in bigger, greener economies, therefore creating a market for the EU, creating a market for the world, therefore helping the world to help these people by being cost efficient once again, good for these people, giving them a reason to stay, giving them jobs, giving them the security that infrastructure and the technical revolution provides. Furthermore, our third argument was largely uncountered by you, where we said that it is not the EU's moral and financial responsibility to solve these actions, to provide solutions for these actions. We have stated why the EU is largely not responsible for any of these climate effects. You yourself have stated that the EU nevertheless does a lot for these people. But we are saying that the EU cannot simply do further actions, considering our first argument, which is how thin our funding is spread, considering the pandemic and other events in the world. Thank you very much.
I would like to welcome everyone, and first of all, I would like to refute some of your statements. So, in your second argument, you told that the EU should offer alternative solutions for these existing problems regarding climate change, and you told that internal migration would be a better solution than external migration. However, until now, it was possible for these countries to receive these asylum seekers, but now it is inevitable for the European Union to accept these migrants from these different countries, because these countries don't have the capacity anymore to accept any more people into these countries. And also, this internal migration would act as a threat multiplier in these countries, for which I would like to bring up an example. Syria is a perfect example for this case. However, it would be bold to assume that climate change was the most important factor of the breakout of the Syrian civil law, but it cannot be denied that it was one reason why it escalated so much these times, because the water scarcity that occurs in the country played a huge role also in the breakout of this civil war. You also asked what kind of legal frame we would like to give for this problem, for which I would like to respond with our second statement, which was about the legal framework that the European lawmakers should make. Laws that provide protection for these asylum seekers are inevitable, because these climate refugees are a huge number of the current asylum seekers, so they should be included in the laws of the European Union. In 1994, there was already an initiative that wanted to give rights to these people, that concluded that every generation has the right to be safe, and that laws should provide rights to all people to move to countries if the current situation in their country doesn't give them the possibilities to live safely in their own country. And I would also like to bring up an example for our first argument, which was about climate change being a real and urgent problem in today's society. And for this is an example that researchers at the Columbia University have stated that between 2000 and 2014, temperatures deviating from the norm in countries migrants come from correlated with increased asylum applications in Europe with 99%. Thank you for your attention.
I'd also like to welcome everyone to this debate and refute some of your arguments and refutations that had been heard throughout the debate. The first one being is the urgency of the problem we are talking about. You do not have to convince us of the urgency of climate change or the realities of climate change and climate refugees. We also agree that this is a huge problem that needs a solution. We just think that our solutions are much better than changing the legal frameworks of the European Union. And also, to this point, I would like to add that your first speaker, Rebecca, said that in the 1970s, people started to argue about and make laws about environmental refugees. Well, that was over 50 years ago. Where are we now? If the problem is so urgent, we would like to treat the illness instead of the symptom and get rid of the problem once and for all. With internal migration, for example, for which your refutation was that local countries do not have the capacity to host these migrants. However, the contrary is true. For example, Saudi Arabia likes to completely exclude themselves from this problem and try to have others take up the responsibility. I would also like to reply to the Syrian example. The Syrian conflict was not primarily influenced by any climate emergencies. It was influenced by a dictator basically making it impossible for his citizens to live in his country by bombing them. And also other great powers like the United States and the Russians funding constant groups against one another with weapons and warplanes and such, which further escalated the conflict. I would also like to add some refutations from one of your major points in Rebecca's speech, which was people running from places where they can't live anymore in deserts, who can drink water. Well, this problem is already being solved by climate scientist Ab Verhagen, who is working on a project where solar panels can be used to harvest the moisture of the air and use it to provide drinkable water to these climate refugees. If we further advance our technological advancements and expand this research and show them to developing countries, for example, and provide some resources for them, it would create a great global market for us to populate uninhabited places that could be perfectly habitable under these conditions with these technological advancements. I would also like to add some confusions that in our second argument, we are not only talking about the EU, just one of the points is the EU funding some technological advancements. Thank you very much for your attention.
So first of all, I would like to react to what your last speaker said about the Syrian example. So you told us that it wasn't primarily caused by climate change, and we agree with that. We just said in our third statement that the climate change is a threat multiplier in many countries. So the Syrian war was obviously not started by climate change, but climate change was a threat multiplier in this country, and in this case, it was something that added more tension to the already existing situation.
To this, I would like to ask a rhetorical, or maybe not rhetorical question, which is, why is water scarce in Syria? Whose responsibility is water scarcity in Syria? Is it climate change? And suddenly, in a couple of years, like 2 or 3 years at most, the water of Syria just dried out? Or is it a dictator holding the water from the population that has rebel areas and rebel groups working in them? Our team thinks is the latter. Thank you.
Well, of course, yes, we agree that the Syrian war was not started by climate change. But we have to talk about the world has never been fair, and climate change is not fair as well. And we are not. We wouldn't like to argue about the Syrian war. We would like to talk about the law framework, the legal framework, and the EU should legally put or do something about asylum seekers because of climate change. So we think our third argument still stands, because climate change is a threat multiplier in that country and in other less developed countries as well. And going back to legal framework, you had a rhetorical question: why is it all necessary to legally phrase all these asylum seekers? Well, law usually doesn't work as a l'art pour l'art, just for itself. It is every time it is a response to an existing problem, and climate migration is an existing problem, and it will have climate migrants in Europe. We don't know how many, we don't know when, and we don't know the exact numbers, but we know that there will be asylum seekers, and there need to be a legal response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would like to continue with rebuttals. You said you don't know how many, you don't know when, and you don't know at what capacity. Yet moments ago you said that law has to be an exact thing. How do you plan preparing a legal framework for something that you do not know, you cannot know, you don't yet understand, and you will in the foreseeable future do not understand? Also, you mentioned that the world is not fair. Begs the question, why should we, when we haven't done anything about this climate, we as in the EU, why should we be the ones to bear its consequences? You've talked about a lot why the EU has to accept migrants and these people, but you fail to mention that why is the EU's responsibility. When we brought it up, you just repeated yourself that is something that is urgent. We understand it's urgent. We don't understand why it has to be also responsibility. Thank you.
All right, so law is a very abstract term, and law has to be abstract. Law cannot specify. It is forbidden to specify on exact numbers. So, for example, if we talk about asylum seekers, we can't just put it in a statute or any law that how many asylum seekers can we accept in a country. But we have to stay abstract because that's what law does. That's what law is. It's not about people, it's about whole communities, it's about the whole world, in an international level, for example. And going back to your moral background or moral grounds argument, I think climate change will affect everyone and in every place. So we cannot just say, all right, we are protected here in Europe because Europe has coastal regions which will be flooded by water, and Europe will have effects on climate change. So we have to do things about climate change. And one of the most cost-effective ways is to legally phrase or legally regulate asylum seekers because of climate change.
I would like to reflect on this point of yours and also one of your previous ones. You brought up that these poor countries that accept refugees are already overcrowded. And you brought up the example of Syria, for example. And yes, we agree that some areas that in some countries that accept these refugees are overcrowded. For example, Syria, Jordan, Gaza, and the West Bank. These are all poor countries that accept the refugees. We agree that more countries in the area should take responsibility for these countries that are closer culturally and linguistically. For example, such rich countries as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or the United Arab Emirates, etc. The burden should not be put on the European Union, which is not as close to these people linguistically, culturally, as these countries that I mentioned before. Therefore, assimilation would not be as easy as it would be there.
So your alternative solution is, of course, not working because the climate in those countries which are closer is kind of the same as in descending countries. Therefore, people are going to the European Union. And we know for sure that even if they are migrating inside of borders now, they will go out eventually. So that's why we need a legal framework to regulate this migration.
Well, the climate is similar in those countries, however, the living conditions aren't. And furthermore, if we can agree on the fact that the climate is similar and could become more extreme due to climate change, there are still solutions that you stated that don't work, but we brought many examples where we could have people drink water in deserts even. If we expand our technological advancements to developing countries and richer Middle Eastern countries, for example.
We are amazed by your example of Opfelhagen, but we think that it is yet too expensive, and that we do not really have the technological advancement yet to create it for the people, and therefore creating a legal framework will be more effective because it is easier and less expensive and so much cheaper than that.
Yes, you mentioned a lot of time that you think that something does not work. You say that ours won't work, but you won't specify why. You give us an example that you think is too expensive and say that the legal framework would not be. Tell me, what could be the approximate cost of 50 years of legal litigation since 1972? Just one of your examples of ineffectiveness inside the bureaucratic system. Millions and millions of euros paid both for buildings, administration, and legislation, and those participating in those legislation that has yet to bear fruit. Thank you very much.
Okay, so very briefly, I would quickly add that from the European Union's point of view, it is not really important to provide those countries like these solutions to provide water or anything like that. From the EU's point of view, it is important for them, for the asylum seekers, to provide laws that protect them, because from their point of view, it is important that in Europe won't be any conflicts because of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from the side of the Pro team, we would like to sum up today's debate. I will talk about the main clash points, which was, we think, legal framework, Syria, and the moral background, and of course the economical aspects of climate change and the regulation on asylum laws of the European Union. So, first of all, the legal framework, the rhetorical question, why is it a necessity? And just to quickly tell the country team that 50 years worth of bureaucracy and all this money, where has it gone? We think that another 50 years of unregulated migration because of climate change would cost way, way more, because we think that climate change is growing exponentially, and this problem is growing exponentially. So people who are seeking asylum in other countries, their number will grow exponentially. So we think legal framework is inevitable, because we have to do something about, we have to know how to legally phrase them and how to treat them in a way that we do with other sorts of migrants, such as economic migrants or war asylum seekers. We need terms, and we need conditions to this whole problem. The second question was, you said people don't say because they don't have jobs. You said you want to create a greener economy and you want to create a better future for them, but they cannot stay there. They are physically unable to stay there because sea levels are rising, and their habitual homes are being flooded by water. They cannot live there anymore. It's not about they have a good job or a bad job. They cannot live there. So from the EU's point of view, this is not it is not important to invest in technological advancements. However, it is their interest to legalize the acceptance of climate refugees. So we would just like to emphasize this, that it is not the EU's point of view. And yet again, we would like to talk about Syria. And of course, we are aware that the Syrian war was not caused by climate change directly, but climate change, again and once again, is a threat multiplier. It gives a burden on the people because they are unable to drink fresh water because there are droughts and water scarcity in Syria. So thank you very much for today's debate, and we are firmly agree on that the rules of receiving environmental and climate refugees must be included in the asylum law of every member state. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we would also like to close the debate with a closing speech, and I would like to reflect a little bit on the clashing points of the debate. First, let's talk about the problem of urgency. Yes, this problem is an urgent problem. Therefore, as we have pointed out in our second argument, we shouldn't resort to the same failed method that we have used not only in the past 50 years, but since the dawn of history. We settled on a land, exploited it, then moved. Now we have nowhere to move, as it is a global problem. Therefore, a legal framework would only justify this toxic practice. Urgency means that we need radical solutions, and to be a radical is to look for the root of a problem. You mentioned, and I quote, "It's not important to provide water, it's important to provide legal framework." Ladies and gentlemen, what could be more important than providing the means for a livable life for those in need? The second clashing point was your criticism of our defense for internal migration. We wanted to emphasize that internal does not only mean internal as in within the boundaries of a country, but internal as in culturally and linguistically internal. You have brought up that these poor countries that accept refugees are already overcrowded. Then you brought up the case of Syria. We agree that that some areas are overcrowded. For example, as you mentioned, Syria, Jordan, Gaza. And we agree that more countries in the area should take responsibility, countries that are closer culturally and linguistically, therefore assimilation will be easier. And these are also very rich countries, for example, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, that would have the means to provide a livable life for these people. The third problem is the legal framework. we have seen that we have seen what the introduction of such proposals have done to the European Union since the influx of asylum seekers in 2015. It led to an economic downfall, a rise of populism, and racially motivated attacks from both sides. The Brexit, which is the largest scandal of the EU, happened because of the promotion of such a legal framework. It was a disaster that led to the disintegration of the European Union. Also, we didn't hear any justifiable counter-arguments for our third argument, which is the moral argument. Why should Europe take the responsibility for a crisis that it did not cause? Therefore, we still think that the statement of this debate is wrong, and we would like to thank you for your attention.
The debate is hereby concluded. I would like to thank both teams for their work and the excellent speeches that helped us explore an important global topic. Dear viewers, we will show you the points given by the judges momentarily, and I would kindly like to ask you to fill out the online questionnaire connected to today's debate. Please follow the activities of the Climate of Change program in the media and on Hungarian Baptist State's different platforms. I would like to thank you for your attention and wish you goodbye.